She only came to help his sick mama. But what she found inside that lonely Texas farmhouse wasn't just sickness. It was a secret. A secret so dark and twisted, it was getting ready to kill again. The year was 1887. The Texas territory was a hard place, baked by a sun that didn't care if you lived or died. The dust was a living thing, choking the air, covering the broken fences that looked like skeletal fingers reaching up from the grave of forgotten dreams. In the middle of all that nothingness stood a single farmhouse, weathered and gray, a tombstone for a family's hope. Her name was Alara. She arrived on a tired wagon, carrying nothing but a small leather bag and a promise to help a dying woman. The man who met her on the porch wasn't a man at all. He was a storm cloud, a wall of grief and anger packed into denim and leather. His name was Silas, and trust was a language he no longer spoke. His eyes, hard as river stones, scanned her up and down. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice like gravel scraping rock. "I'm here for your mother," Alara said, her own voice steady, calm. A rock in his raging river. He didn't believe her. He didn't believe anyone. But he stepped aside, because the woman inside was fading, and he was out of options. He thought Alara was just a nurse, a temporary fix for a problem that had no solution. He was wrong. The moment her boot crossed that threshold, a clock started ticking. A clock that was counting down to the unearthing of a terrible truth. She thought she was there to fight a fever. She was actually stepping into a war. Inside, the house smelled of dust and decay and something else. Fear. It clung to the air, thick and heavy. In a dim room, his mother, Martha, lay in a worn-out bed. She was a ghost, her skin pale, her breath a shallow whisper. Alara knelt beside her, taking the woman's frail, cold hand. The tenderness in her touch was something this house hadn't felt in years. From the doorway, Silas watched. His arms were crossed tight against his chest, a human fortress. He paced the floorboards, the heavy thud of his boots trying to drown out the sudden, unwelcome feeling of hope that had just walked in. He wanted it gone. Hope was a liar. It had lied to him before. That night, as coyotes howled their lonely songs to the moon, Alara worked. She cleaned the sick room, prepared a broth, and brewed a special tea with herbs from her bag. She hummed a quiet tune, a melody that pushed back against the shadows. Silas stood in the doorway, a sentinel of doubt. He saw his mother sip the tea, saw a flicker of life return to her eyes. He saw Alara wipe the sweat from Martha's brow with a gentleness that made his own heart ache. He didn't want to feel it. He couldn't afford to feel it. He turned away, muttering that she wouldn't last. The land would break her. The loneliness would eat her alive. But he wasn't afraid she would leave. He was terrified she might stay. As dawn painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Alara was still there, sitting in a chair by the bed. She hadn't slept. Her resolve was absolute. And for the first time in a long, long time, the farmhouse didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a battleground, a place where life was putting up a fight. Silas saw it. He wouldn't admit it, not to her, not to himself. But he knew. Her arrival wasn't an act of charity. It was the first shot in a war he didn't even know was being fought. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm, the rhythm of a slow-burning fuse. Alara's quiet presence began to change the very air in the house. She moved with a purpose that was both gentle and relentless. She didn't just tend to Martha. She tended to the house itself. She scrubbed the floors, patched a leak in the roof, and even started a small garden in a patch of stubborn soil out back. Each small act was a chipping away at the fortress of neglect and sorrow. Silas watched her. He was always watching. From the barn, from the edge of a field, through a dusty window pane. He saw the way she coaxed a genuine smile from his mother. He heard the sound of faint laughter, a sound so alien in that house it was like a foreign language. He saw the color returning to Martha's cheeks. He saw the life returning to the house. And it scared him more than any drought or storm ever could. Because life meant hope. And hope was a path that led directly back to the pain he had buried so deep. But there was something else. A detail that pricked at the edge of his mind. Every evening, Ilara brewed his mother a specific tea. She was meticulous about it, a blend of chamomile, lavender, and one other root. A dark, gnarled thing she kept separate from the others. He'd never seen it before. One afternoon, while Ilara was in the garden, he slipped into the kitchen. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt like a trespasser in his own home. He found the small pouch where she kept the root. He pulled one out. It was bitter on his tongue, with an odd, numbing quality. It didn't feel like medicine. It felt like something else entirely. That night, he watched Ilara prepare the tea. She measured the herbs carefully, her face a mask of concentration. She steeped the brew, the steam rising in the lamplight. Then she took the cup to his mother's room. Silas waited in the shadows of the hall, his gut churning. He heard his mother's weak voice, then Ilara's soothing response. He heard the clink of the cup against the saucer. Then silence. What was she doing? What was in that tea? Was she healing his mother, or was she the source of the sickness itself? The thought was poison, spreading through his mind. This woman was a stranger. She had appeared out of nowhere with her gentle smiles and capable hands. But kindness could be a mask. He'd seen it before. He crept closer to the door, pressing his ear against the rough wood. He heard Ilara humming again. But this time, the tune didn't sound comforting. It sounded triumphant. A chill snaked down his spine. He backed away slowly, his mind racing. He had let a viper into his home. A beautiful, quiet viper who was slowly, methodically taking everything from him. He had to know the truth. He had to find out what she was really doing here. Before it was too late. The next day, Silas followed her. He was a shadow, silent and unseen. He watched as she went about her chores, her movements calm and efficient. There was nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching a performance. When she went to the well to draw water, he saw his chance. He slipped back into the house, heading straight for her room. It was small and sparse, containing only a bedroll and her leather bag. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were bundles of dried herbs, clean bandages, and a small bottle of laudanum. Standard supplies. But tucked into a side pocket, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was something else. It was a small, leather-bound journal. His breath caught in his throat. This was it. The proof. He opened it, his eyes scanning the neat, elegant script. But it wasn't a diary of her travels. It wasn't a collection of recipes. It was a ledger. A list of names, towns, and dates. Beside each name was a notation. Fever, resolved. Broken bone, mended. Childbirth, successful. It was a record of her work, of the people she had helped. But as he flipped through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. Some entries were different. Beside a name, it would say, lingering illness, source unknown. And then, a few pages later, next to the same name, condition worsened. Family suspect foul play. His blood ran cold. He flipped to the last written page. The entry was dated just a week before she arrived at his ranch. It was about a man in a town 2 days' ride away. Mr. Abernathy, a wasting sickness. His son believes he is being poisoned. The local doctor is useless. Then, a final chilling note was scrawled at the bottom. The root is present here too. The root. The same dark, gnarled root she was putting in his mother's tea. What did it mean? Was she a healer who specialized in identifying poisons? Or was she a poisoner, moving from town to town, creating sickness so she could pretend to cure it? He felt a wave of nausea. He had to be wrong. The kindness in her eyes, the gentleness of her touch. It couldn't be a lie. Could it? He heard the creak of the porch steps. She was coming back. He shoved the journal into her bag, his movements clumsy and loud. He scrambled out of the room just as she walked through the front door, a bucket of water in her hand. She looked at him, her brow furrowed with concern. "Silas, are you all right? You look pale." Her voice was soft, laced with care, but all he could hear was the scratching of her pen in that ledger. All he could see were the names of the dead and dying. He stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of suspicion and fear. He saw the woman who had brought laughter back into his house, and he saw the woman who might be a cold-blooded killer, and he had no idea which one was real. That night, sleep was a luxury Silas couldn't afford. Every shadow in the house seemed to twist into a menacing shape. Every creak of the floorboards was Alara creeping through the halls. He sat in the dark, a shotgun resting across his lap, his eyes fixed on the door to his mother's room. He had to protect her. But how could he protect her from the very person who was supposed to be her savior? He decided on a plan. It was desperate, but it was all he had. The next morning, when Alara prepared the tea, he would switch the cups. He would give the poisoned cup to Alara herself. If she was innocent, she would drink it without a second thought. If she was guilty, she would reveal herself. The thought of it made him sick, but the fear of doing nothing was worse. Morning came, gray and tense. The air was thick with unspoken words. Alara moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, seemingly oblivious to the storm raging inside him. She prepared 2 cups of tea, one for his mother, one for herself. Just as he'd hoped. She set the tray down on the table and turned to fetch the milk. This was his moment. His heart pounded like a drum against his ribs. With a shaking hand, he switched the cups. It was done in a second. He stepped back, his face a mask of stone, as she returned to the tray. She picked up the tray and carried it into his mother's room. Silas followed, his hand hovering near the pistol tucked into his belt. The moment of truth had arrived. Alara handed 1 cup to his mother. Then she sat down in her usual chair, picking up the second cup. The cup that was meant for Martha. The cup that Silas believed held a slow-acting poison. She smiled softly at his mother. "A beautiful morning, isn't it?" she said, her voice a gentle melody. She raised the cup to her lips. Silas held his breath. His entire world narrowed to that single moment, that single porcelain cup. He watched her tilt her head back. He watched her drink. She took a long, slow sip. Then she lowered the cup, a serene expression on her face. Nothing happened. She didn't choke. She didn't gasp. She just smiled, her eyes clear and bright. Silas felt the world tilt on its axis. He was wrong. He had been completely, utterly wrong. The relief that washed over him was so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It was followed by a crushing wave of shame. He had suspected this kind, gentle woman of the most heinous crime. He had been ready to watch her die. What kind of monster had he become? He stumbled back out of the room, his mind reeling. He had to get some air. He had to think. He burst out of the farmhouse and into the harsh morning light, gasping for breath. He was a fool, a paranoid, grief-stricken fool. He leaned against the railing of the porch, his head in his hands. He had been so sure. The root, the journal. It had all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. But he was wrong. The tea was just tea. The root was just medicine. Alara was just a healer. He stayed there for a long time, the Texas sun beating down on his back. When he finally regained his composure, he turned to go back inside. He needed to apologize. He didn't know how, but he knew he had to. He owed her that much. He pushed open the door and walked back down the hall. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He reached his mother's doorway and peered inside. And his heart stopped. Alara was on the floor. Her body was convulsing, her face pale and beaded with sweat. The teacup lay shattered beside her. His mother, Martha, was sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with a terror he hadn't seen in years. She was pointing a trembling finger not at Alara, but at the window. Silas spun around, his eyes darting to the window. It was empty. There was nothing there but the vast, empty prairie. "What is it, Mama?" he whispered, rushing to Alara's side. "What happened?" Martha's voice was a ragged croak. "It wasn't her," she gasped, her words tumbling over each other. "The tea. It's not her doing. It's him. He's been here again." Silas stared at his mother, his mind struggling to make sense of her words. "Him? Who, Mama? Who's been here?" But Martha just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "The man who watches," she whispered. "The man from the shadows." Silas looked down at Alara, who was now lying still, her breathing shallow. Then he looked back at the empty window. He had been so focused on the enemy within his walls, he had never once thought to look for the enemy outside. He had been watching Alara, but someone else had been watching them all. The panic that seized Silas was cold and sharp. He scooped Alara into his arms. She was frighteningly light, and carried her to her own small room. He laid her on her bedroll, his mind racing. The poison. It was real. But he had gotten it all wrong. Alara hadn't been poisoning his mother. She had been administering an antidote. That dark, gnarled root wasn't the sickness. It was the cure. Someone else was poisoning Martha, and Alara had known it. The journal, the entries about foul play. She wasn't a killer. She was a detective, a protector who moved in the shadows of sickness. And he, in his blind grief and suspicion, had almost gotten her killed. He forced her to drink a mixture of charcoal and water, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the cup. He didn't know if it would work, but it was all he could think to do. As he tended to her, his mother's words echoed in his head. The man who watches. The man from the shadows. It had to be a delusion, a fever dream brought on by her illness. This ranch was isolated. They hadn't had a visitor in over a year. There was no one out there. And yet, the strange occurrences he had dismissed for months suddenly came rushing back. The fence post that was mysteriously broken. The tool that went missing from the barn. The feeling, late at night, of being watched from the darkness of the fields. He had blamed it on grief, on the tricks an exhausted mind plays. Now he wasn't so sure. Alara's breathing steadied. The color slowly began to return to her face. The immediate danger had passed. Silas sank back on his heels, a wave of exhaustion and guilt washing over him. He had been so wrong. He had let his own demons blind him to the truth. He had been fighting the wrong enemy. After an hour, Alara's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, her gaze weak but clear. There was no accusation in her eyes, only a weary understanding. "You switched the cups," she whispered, her voice hoarse. It wasn't a question. Silas could only nod, the shame burning in his gut. "I thought," he began, but the words died in his throat. "I know what you thought," she said softly. "But you're wrong, Silas. The danger isn't in this house. It's outside." She pushed herself up, wincing. "He knows I'm here. He knows I'm getting close to the truth. He's getting desperate." "Who?" Silas demanded, his voice tight. "Who is doing this?" Before Alara could answer, a sound from outside cut through the still afternoon air. It was the sharp, unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. It was followed by the tinkle of shattering glass. A bullet had just ripped through the window of the main room, embedding itself in the wall just inches from where his mother was sitting. Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed the shotgun from his room and shoved a handful of shells into his pocket. His fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard rage. He had been a fool, cowering in his own home, haunted by ghosts of the past. But this was no ghost. This was real. This was a man who had tried to kill his mother and had just tried to kill the woman who saved her. "Stay here. Bar the door," he ordered Alara, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't open it for anyone but me." He crept to the front door, his shotgun held at the ready. He peered through a crack in the wood. He saw him. A lone figure on horseback, sitting at the edge of his property, just beyond the broken fence line. The man was too far away to see clearly, but the message was unmistakable. It was a declaration of war. The man raised his rifle again, not to fire, but in a mocking salute. Then he turned his horse and galloped away, disappearing into the shimmering heat haze. Silas stared after him, his knuckles white on the stock of his gun. His mother was right. There was a man in the shadows, and he had just stepped into the light. The silence that followed the rider's departure was heavier and more menacing than any sound. Silas bolted the door and checked every window, his movements sharp and precise. The rage was still there, a hot coal in his chest, but beneath it, a cold dread was spreading. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was calculated. The poison, the surveillance, the warning shot. It was a campaign of terror designed to drive them off this land. But why? This ranch was barely surviving. The land was dry, the well was unreliable. It was worthless. Or was it? He went back to Alara. She was sitting up, sipping water, her strength slowly returning. "He wants this land," Silas said, the pieces clicking into place. "That's what this is about. Someone wants this land." Alara nodded, her eyes dark with grim certainty. "And they're willing to kill for it. Your mother's sickness, Silas. I've seen it before. It's caused by a poison made from crushed oleander leaves, mixed with a touch of arsenic. It's slow, agonizing. It mimics the symptoms of consumption. A local doctor would never spot it." "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice filled with a new respect. "My father was a physician," she explained. "He taught me to look beyond the obvious symptoms, to see the patterns others miss. After he passed, I found his journals. He wrote about a series of unexplained deaths in a mining town. He suspected a single man was behind them, a man who used poison to acquire land claims from the sick and dying. But he never found proof. The man was a ghost." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "I think that ghost has found his way to Texas." A cold realization washed over Silas. His own father. He hadn't died of a fever as the town doctor had claimed. He had withered away, just like his mother was now. At the time, Silas had been too young, too consumed with his own grief to question it. But now, it all made sense. His father hadn't lost a fight with an illness. He had been murdered. And the same man was now trying to finish the job. The grief and guilt he had carried for years twisted into something new, something sharp and dangerous, a thirst for vengeance. "Jebediah," Silas whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. It had to be him. Jebediah was their closest neighbor, though his ranch was miles away. He was a hard, cruel man who had always looked at their small plot of land with greedy eyes. There had been disputes over a dried-up creek bed that bordered their properties. His father had always stood his ground. After his father's death, Jebediah had offered to buy the ranch for a pittance. Silas, in his anger and sorrow, had nearly taken a shot at him. After that, they had become ghosts to each other, two silent ranches separated by miles of dust and bad blood. "He's been poisoning the water," Alara said, voicing his own dawning horror. "The well. A little bit each day. Enough to make your mother sick, but not enough to be obvious. When I arrived, I started giving her water from my own canteen, and I began giving her the antidote. That's when he must have realized something was wrong. He escalated. He must have snuck in and put a larger dose directly into the teapot. The teacup. He had given Alara the cup with the concentrated dose. He had nearly delivered the killing blow himself. The thought made him feel hollow. "We have to get Mama out of here," Silas said, his voice urgent. "We'll go to the sheriff in Fort Griffin." Alara shook her head. "No. The sheriff won't believe us. We have no proof. Just the word of a grieving son and a strange woman. And Jebediah is a respected man. He has money, influence. He'll paint you as crazy, and me as a charlatan." She stood up, her legs still a bit unsteady, but her eyes were firm. "Proof is what we need, and I know where to find it." "Where?" "In your father's memory," she said. "The barn fire. You told me it happened a year after your father died. You said you lost everything." She looked at him intently. "Silas, what if you didn't? What if something survived? Something your father hid. Something that Jebediah is still looking for." The old barn. It stood like a blackened skeleton at the edge of the property. He hadn't been inside it since that night. The memory was too painful. The smell of smoke, the heat of the flames, the terror of being a boy watching his world burn. But Alara was right. He had been so consumed by what he had lost, he had never considered what might have been left behind. Something worth killing for. "We go tonight," he said, his decision made. The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. All that remained was a cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just defending his home. He was hunting a murderer. He was going to uncover the truth his father had died to protect. And he was going to make Jebediah pay. As dusk settled, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, the farmhouse became a fortress. Silas and Alara worked in silence, their movements synchronized by a shared, unspoken purpose. They barricaded the doors with heavy furniture and nailed boards over the shattered window. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Martha was asleep, a fitful rest brought on by a sedative Alara had given her. She was safe, for now. The real danger lay ahead, in the skeletal remains of the old barn. When the moon was high, casting a pale, ghostly light over the land, they slipped out the back door. The night air was cool, a welcome relief from the tension coiling inside the house. Silas led the way, shotgun in hand, his eyes scanning the darkness. Alara followed close behind, carrying a lantern and a small shovel. The barn loomed before them, a gaping mouth of charred timbers and blackest shadow. The smell of old smoke still clung to the air, a phantom of the night that had seared itself into his memory. He had avoided this place for years. Now he was walking back into the heart of his nightmare. He pushed aside a section of the collapsed wall, the rotten wood groaning in protest. He held the lantern high, its light cutting a shaky circle in the oppressive darkness. The inside was a chaotic jumble of burnt beams, rusted tools, and the ghosts of a life that had been violently erased. "My father spent most of his time out here," Silas said, his voice low. "He had a small office in the back corner. Said he did his best thinking here." They made their way through the debris, the lantern light dancing across the wreckage. The office was barely recognizable. The desk was a heap of charcoal, the chair a few blackened sticks. It looked like nothing could have survived. Hope began to dwindle. "Think, Silas," Alara urged, her voice a soft anchor in the darkness. "Your father knew Jebediah was a threat. If he had something to hide, where would he put it? Somewhere no one would ever think to look." Silas closed his eyes, forcing himself back to that time. He remembered his father, a quiet, thoughtful man who trusted the earth more than he trusted people. He remembered him working at that desk, poring over maps and ledgers. And he remembered something else. His father had a peculiar habit. When he was deep in thought, he would tap his foot against one of the stone foundation blocks that supported the corner of the office. It had driven his mother crazy. a constant, rhythmic tapping. His eyes snapped open. "The foundation," he whispered. He rushed to the corner and knelt down, running his hands over the large, flat stones. They were cool and solid. He pushed and pulled at them, but they wouldn't budge. He grabbed the shovel and began to dig at the packed earth around one of the stones. It was hard, slow work. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mixing with the grime and soot. After several minutes of frantic digging, the shovel struck something that wasn't dirt or rock. It was a dull, metallic thud. His heart leaped into his throat. Working together, they cleared the rest of the dirt away. There, nestled beneath the foundation stone, was a small, iron box. It was rusted and scorched, but it was intact. With trembling hands, Silas lifted it from its hiding place. The lock had been fused shut by the heat of the fire. He took the butt of his shotgun and smashed it, the sound echoing through the ruined barn. The lock broke. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like faded velvet, was not a deed or a map. It was a rock. A single, heavy, unimpressive-looking rock, streaked with a dull, yellowish metal. Silas stared at it, confused. "It's just a rock," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. "No," Alara breathed, reaching into the box. She lifted the rock, her eyes wide with awe in the lantern light. "It's not just a rock, Silas." She turned it over in her hands. "This is gold ore, not just a few flakes. This is a vein, a rich one. Your father didn't find water on this land. He found gold." The revelation hit Silas like a physical blow. Gold. The worthless, dried-up piece of land he had been fighting to keep out of sheer stubbornness was a gold mine. His father's quiet obsession, the long hours in the barn, the disputes with Jebediah, it was never about water. It was about a fortune buried right beneath their feet. Jebediah hadn't just been a greedy neighbor. He knew. He had known all along. He had murdered his father for this secret, and he had been trying to drive them away to claim it for himself. The barn fire. It wasn't an accident. It was an act of destruction. Jebediah must have set it, hoping to destroy any proof, any maps or surveys his father had made. He was trying to erase the secret from existence. A sudden noise from outside shattered the silence. A horse whinnying, too close. Silas grabbed the shotgun, his blood turning to ice. He extinguished the lantern, plunging them into absolute darkness. They were trapped. He had led them right into a trap. Peering through a gap in the charred walls, Silas could see them. Two riders, their forms silhouetted against the moonlit sky. One was Jebediah. The other was a hired man, a hulking brute with a rifle cradled in his arms. "He's in there!" Jebediah's voice snarled, carrying on the night air. "I saw the light! He found the box! Flush him out!" The hired man dismounted, carrying a torch. He lit it, the sudden flare of light making Silas flinch. He was going to burn the barn down again, this time with them inside it. There was no escape. The back was a collapsed wall of heavy timbers. The only way out was the main entrance, where Jebediah and his man were waiting. They were cornered. Silas looked at Alara, her face pale but resolute in the flickering torchlight from outside. He saw the iron box in her hands. This was it. The secret his father died for, the reason his mother was poisoned, the truth that had brought Alara into his life, and it was about to get them all killed. "We're not going to die in here," Silas said, his voice a low growl. He was no longer the scared boy who had watched his world burn. He was the son of the man who had been murdered, and the rage that had been simmering for years was about to boil over. "He wants the box. He's going to get it." He looked at Alara. "Can you run?" She nodded, clutching the heavy box to her chest. "When I make my move, you run for the house. Don't stop. Don't look back. Bar the door and keep Mama safe." "Silas, no." she whispered, her eyes pleading. "It's the only way," he said, his gaze hard as steel. "He won't expect me to fight back." He watched the approaching torch. The hired man was getting closer, his shadow dancing and monstrous on the barn walls. Silas took a deep breath. He checked the shells in his shotgun. He was outnumbered, outgunned. But he had something they didn't. He had nothing left to lose. The hired man reached the entrance, the torch held high. He peered into the darkness, a cruel sneer on his face. "Come on out, Silas. Make it easy on yourself." In that split second, Silas moved. He didn't rise and fire like a cornered animal. He did the last thing they would expect. He kicked out a loose support beam near the entrance. The rotten wood snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The entire front section of the barn, weakened by the first fire and Silas's kick, groaned in protest. Then, with a deafening roar, it collapsed. Timbers, roof shingles, and a cloud of black dust crashed down, completely blocking the entrance. The hired man screamed as he leaped back, barely avoiding being crushed. "Now!" Silas yelled. He pointed Alara toward a small, previously hidden gap in the back wall, a space he had used to sneak out as a boy, a space he had forgotten until this very moment. "Go! Run!" Alara didn't hesitate. She scrambled through the opening, the iron box in her arms, and disappeared into the night. Silas turned back, his heart hammering. The collapse had bought them time, but it had also trapped him. He could hear Jebediah shouting, cursing, trying to clear the debris. They would get through eventually. He was a rat in a trap. He moved deeper into the darkness of the barn, his shotgun ready. He could hear them now, tearing at the fallen timbers. He wouldn't make it easy for them. When they broke through, he would be waiting. He would make his stand here, in the ashes of his past. He pressed himself against a sturdy wall, the rough, charred wood biting into his back. The sounds of digging grew louder, more frantic. He could hear Jebediah's ragged breaths. The time for running was over. The time for justice had come. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were his own ragged breathing and the scraping and clawing at the collapsed entrance. Then he heard a new sound. A voice. It was Alara's. "Jebediah!" she yelled, her voice clear and strong, coming from the direction of the farmhouse. "It's over! I have the box!" Silas's blood ran cold. What was she doing? She was supposed to be safe, locked inside. "You have nothing, girl!" Jebediah roared back, the sound of his digging stopping. "Give me the box and the rock, and I might let you and the boy live." "The rock is right here," Alara's voice called out. "But the box also had your name in it, Jebediah. It had Samuel's journal. He wrote everything down. How you threatened him. How you knew about the gold. It's all in here. Proof. It was a bluff. A brilliant, dangerous bluff. There was no journal in the box. But Jebediah didn't know that. Silas could almost feel the man's uncertainty, his greed warring with his caution. Then came the sound that changed everything. The unmistakable click-clack of horses' hooves, not one or two, at least half a dozen, approaching at a steady trot. "That would be Sheriff Miller," Alara's voice announced, cool and confident. "I sent a rider for him before we came out here. Told him there was trouble at the Silas Ranch. Told him a man named Jebediah was responsible." Another bluff. There was no rider. There was no sheriff. Or was there? Silas heard Jebediah curse violently. The element of surprise was gone. If the sheriff really was coming, Jebediah and his hired man would be caught red-handed, trespassing and armed. Their whole plan was falling apart. "It's a trick!" Jebediah snarled to his man. "Get the box! I'll handle the boy!" The digging started again, but now it was frenzied, desperate. Silas knew he had only seconds. He had to get out. He had to get to Alara. She had just painted a target on her back. He scrambled over the debris at the back of the barn, his hands raw, his lungs burning from the dust. He burst out into the cool night air and ran, his legs pumping, his eyes fixed on the farmhouse. He saw her. She was standing on the porch, holding the lantern high, a beacon of defiance. But she wasn't alone. As he got closer, he saw the shapes of men on horseback emerging from the darkness. It wasn't a bluff. The sheriff was here. But Jebediah didn't see the sheriff. All he saw was Alara on the porch, the woman who had ruined everything. He finally broke through the collapsed barn entrance, his face a mask of fury. He raised his pistol, ignoring the approaching riders, his eyes filled with a murderous rage. He was going to kill her. Silas saw it happen as if in slow motion, the flash of fire from the barrel of Jebediah's gun. Alara stumbling back, the lantern falling from her hand, shattering on the wooden porch. Silas let out a roar of pure rage and raised his own shotgun. He didn't aim. He didn't think. He fired. The blast ripped through the night, a deafening explosion of sound and fury. Jebediah staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the ground. In the same instant, the sheriff and his deputies descended, their own guns drawn. "Drop it!" the sheriff yelled, his voice cutting through the ringing in Silas's ears. The hired man, seeing he was surrounded, threw his rifle down and raised his hands. It was over. The chaos subsided as quickly as it had erupted, leaving behind a scene illuminated by the flickering flames from the spilled lantern oil on the porch. Silas didn't care about Jebediah or the sheriff. He ran to the porch, his heart frozen with terror. "Ilara!" She was lying on the wooden planks, a dark stain spreading across the fabric of her dress. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering over the wound, afraid to touch her, afraid of what he would find. Her eyes were open, looking up at him. A small, pained smile touched her lips. "You were right, Silas," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames. "You didn't fight like a cornered animal. You fought like a man protecting his family." The fire on the porch licked at the dry wood of the house, the home he had just won back. But Silas didn't see the flames. He only saw her, the woman who had walked into his broken life and shown him how to be whole again. The woman who had just taken a bullet for him. And as the sheriff's men dragged a screaming Jebediah away, Silas knew the fight wasn't over. He had won back his land. He had found justice for his father. But now he had to save the woman who had saved him. The bullet had gone clean through her side. It was a nasty wound, but Alara was tough. Tougher than anyone Silas had ever known. With the sheriff's help, they got her inside, away from the spreading fire on the porch, which the deputies quickly extinguished. They laid her on Silas's own bed. Using the knowledge she herself had taught him over the past weeks, Silas cleaned and bandaged the wound. His hands, usually clumsy with anything delicate, were steady and sure. He worked with a focus he didn't know he possessed, his entire world narrowed to this one task: keeping her alive. His mother, Martha, was awake now, her eyes clear and sharp for the first time in months. The poison was gone from her system, and the fog of fear had lifted. She sat by Alara's side, holding her hand, murmuring words of comfort. The two women, one who had been fading away and one who had pulled her back, were now bound by a trial of blood and fire. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Miller, stood by the door, holding the iron box. He had listened to their story, seen the gold ore, and put Jebediah and his man in chains. Justice, it turned out, had finally come to the Texas plains. "Your father was a good man, Silas," Sheriff Miller said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "He tried to tell me about Jebediah years ago, but he had no proof. Just a bad feeling. Looks like his feeling was right." He set the box on the table. "This land is yours. The gold is yours. You're a rich man now." Silas looked away from Alara, his gaze falling on the box. The gold. The reason for all the death and pain. He felt nothing. It meant nothing to him. He looked back at Alara's pale face, at her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. That was his treasure. Her life. Her courage. Her unwavering belief that he could be better than the bitter man he had become. The sun was rising, casting a warm, golden light through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A new day was dawning, not just on the Texas territory, but inside the walls of that small farmhouse. The long night was over. Days turned into weeks. Under Silas and Martha's constant care, Alara slowly healed. The ranch healed with her. Silas, fueled by a new purpose, began to rebuild. He repaired the barn, mended the fences, and cleared the fields. He worked from sunup to sundown, the hard labor a balm for his soul. He was no longer just tending a piece of dirt. He was building a future he never would have believed possible. Martha, free from the poison, grew stronger every day. Her laughter, once a fragile whisper, now filled the house, full and rich. She and Alara would spend hours on the porch, talking and sewing, their bond as strong as any mother and daughter. Silas would watch them, a feeling of peace settling in his heart. The ghosts were gone. The bitterness had been washed away. The silence had been replaced by life. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of glory, he found Alara standing by the newly repaired fence, looking out over the land. Her wound was almost healed, leaving only a faint scar. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You've brought it back to life." "We brought it back to life," he corrected her, standing beside her. The air between them was comfortable, charged with unspoken feelings. "You never told me why you came here, Alara. Not really." She turned to him, her eyes catching the last rays of sunlight. "I told you. My father's journals. He dedicated his life to healing people. But he was haunted by the ones he couldn't save, the ones he suspected were murdered. After he died, I made a promise. I would find the ghost he hunted. I followed the trail of unexplained illnesses for 2 years. It finally led me here. To your mother." "You came here seeking justice," Silas said, a sense of awe in his voice. "I came seeking justice," she agreed. "But I found a family instead." He reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her grip strong. For the first time, he didn't pull away. He didn't hide behind a wall of anger. He just stood there, holding her hand, as the stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky. He knew, in that quiet moment, that her arrival had not been a coincidence. She hadn't just come to heal his mother. She hadn't just come to uncover a secret. She had come to heal him. She had healed his whole broken family, and in doing so, she had built a new one. The lonely Texas farmhouse was no longer a tombstone of grief. It was a home, and it was just the beginning of their story. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption on the frontier, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that prove even in the darkest of places, a single light can change everything.